Hey, how's it going? This is Ahmed Nishabi for AE Tuts Plus, and in this tutorial we will be looking at creating a really cool title effect suitable for epic title sequences. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have a 3D animated text sequence which I made in Maya. So to begin, you would need to create a text animation. It does not need to be animated in a 3D application. You can create your animated text in After Effects, or you can also implement these effects on a person or anything with an alpha channel, as long as it has movement. It's best not to have camera movement for the trail effect because it's not a 3D generated effect and it would look out of place. So in After Effects, import your title sequence and drag it into the Create New composition, and pre-compose it and call it title. Now duplicate that layer and rename the duplicate trails. And now we need to apply the echo effect to the trail layer. For the echo time in seconds, leave that at default. Change the number of echoes to 24. In your example it may be less or more depending on how many echoes you want, and reduce the starting intensity to 0.80 and the decay to 0.85. For the echo operator I'll change that to screen. So this is what the echo effect gives us alone, and to enhance this, make it look more of a time trail effect, we need to add find edges. If you toggle the transparency grid, you will see that the edges are dark and the fill is light. We need to invert that and add a bit of blend for a smoother look. Now we can add a curves adjustment to reduce the effect a little, and add in some color. The next step would be to add a bit of vector blur and some turbulent displace animation. Set the amount to 40 and the size to about 7 or 7 or 8. And if we toggle the evolution, you can see that happening by alt clicking on the evolution stopwatch and typing time times 150. Do a quick RAM preview. Okay, that's looking good. And now we need to animate the opacity, so we create a keyframe around this point in time and lower the opacity to 0. Select the keyframes, right click, keyframe assistance, easy ease, and now we need to change the transfer mode of the trails layer to screen, and there we have the time trail effect. And now we can create the rest of the logo, the rectangles. So we create a new solid, call this shape, and can turn it off for a sec and draw a shape. Double click to resize it a bit. Okay, and we want to add a ramp. Change the color. We can turn the layer back on. and set the ramp up correctly. Change it to a radial. And we can add a stroke. Generate stroke. And we can make it a light purple. Okay. We could also add some fractal noise. Change the blending mode to overlay. Scale it up. We can reduce the opacity as well. There we have it. And there we go, that's one shape done. We can duplicate that layer and just move that over. We can put these shapes underneath the text. And for shape 2, we can change the RAM positions. Okay, that's it for setting up the shapes. Or we can pre-compose these two layers first, call it shape, and hit T, make a keyframe about as soon as that plus animates in, and make another keyframe. Okay, so now that fades in. A quick RAM preview. Alright, so now that we've finished creating our time trail effect, we're going to be moving on to creating the disintegration. For that we're going to be using trapcode form, and we will be needing a new composition. So we will create a new comp and call this disintegration. And drag that into our comp folder. By the way, I sort of just organized my project and extended the time length of our first comp to around 12 seconds, just to allow time for our disintegration. Okay, so let's create a new solid and call it disintegration. And apply trapcode form. Now let's drag in our time trail title composition. Alright, so that's in there. Now we need to set up trapcode form. So in the base form settings, let's change the size to 1280 by 720, and the size Z will be 0. Particles in X will make it 1280 by 720 as well, and particles in Z will make 1. Alright, save that. So we'll go down to layer maps, and in the color and alpha we will set it to time trail title and RGBA to RGBA, and we'll map it over the X and Y. Alright, so let's turn off this layer for a second, and what we're seeing now is trapcode form interpreting whatever's contained in this composition through particles. Okay, so now we're going to create a detailed wipe transition to map the displacement, fractal strength, and disperse. So let's create a new composition and call it wipe. and make sure it's 12 seconds. Hit OK. Now let's create a new black solid and a new white solid. Okay, and let's bring the white solid below the black solid and duplicate that. We'll call this blank white, and we'll call this fractal noise, and we'll call this black white. So we want to add fractal noise to the fractal noise layer. Solo that for a second and play around with the settings. And now we want a linear wipe, and we're going to be animating this from right to left. So at around 5 seconds, we'll keyframe the transition completion and make it to about 10 seconds. And increase the feather. Okay. Now we want to select these keyframes and choose Easy Ease. So we want to select this effect and edit copy and paste it onto the black wipe solid. Now unsolo that, and we should have something like this. Now we can play around with the linear wipe of the black wipe solid. Increase the feather. We can reduce the transition completion. Alright. And we could also play around with the fractal noise a bit, increase the contrast a bit. And we can also animate the evolution by alt clicking and typing time times 200, and we can reduce the scale a bit. So the next step would be to enhance this effect a bit. So we can add an adjustment layer and add a vector blur and just add a subtle amount and a turbulent displace. Okay, apply the turbulent displace and change the displacement type to twist smoother. Set the amount to 13 and the size to 72, and alt click on the evolution, and by using the pick whip connect the evolution to the black wipe layer's transition completion. So now the turbulent displace animates along with the linear transition. So let's do a quick RAM preview and see how that looks. Let's extend the transition of the linear wipe to about 4 seconds or 3. So we'll just extend it out a bit more, and that should be alright. So let's go back to the disintegration composition and test this out. Okay, so let's bring in the wipe comp and I'll put that into the precons folder and turn that off. Okay, so now let's link the fractal strength to the wipe layer and map that over to xy time equals z, or plus time, and the same thing for disperse. Alright, after you've mapped and connected the fractal strength and disperse to the wipe composition, you need to set an amount for each property before the effect occurs. In the disperse and twist properties, set the disperse to about 250 and the fractal field displace amount to 250 as well. Let's increase the flow x to about 100, the flow y to about 25, and the same for the z. So these flow settings will generate the particle's fluid movement. Okay, so let's see what we've got. Alright, that looks good. Let's just decrease the amount of disperse. To about 185. Okay. So now we can add a camera movement. So I just created a simple camera movement that zooms into the logo and rotates slightly. Okay, now that we have our camera movement made, we need to animate the opacity for the time trail title layer and the disintegration layer so that this fades out and this will animate in. Okay, so to do that, create a keyframe for the opacity for both layers, move down 10 frames and create another keyframe for this layer, move down 10 frames again and create a keyframe for this layer. Set this amount to 0, and for the disintegration, set the first amount to 0. Now do a quick RAM preview and test out the transition. This seems to work okay. Alright, select the keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, and apply an easy ease, and that should work out pretty good. Okay, now that we have done that, we can start to clean up our comp by trimming the beginning and split this layer. Edit split, just to keep things organized. Alright, and now turn on global motion blur and right click, composition settings, advanced, and these are my motion blur settings. My shutter angle is 360, shutter phase is 90, samples per frame is 16, and adaptive sample limit is 128. You can have your own settings if you wish, but these settings work fine for my example. And do a quick RAM preview. Alright, okay, that's looking good. Now we can drag the disintegration comp into a new composition and rename it render comp. In this comp we can add some color correction to prepare for a final render. So thanks for watching this tutorial from AE Tuts Plus. This is Ahmed Nishabi and I hope you enjoyed it. Wish you guys the best with your work, and thanks for watching.